Harlem, New York. The coppers are calling it the boldest act of war this city has ever seen. A bloodbath written in stone. Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson, only 27 years old, but already the godfather holding the reins of Harlem's numbers game, has drawn a line in the sand against Arthur Dutch, Schultz, Fliegenheimer, and his entire crew of racketeers. 6 bodies have dropped in just 24 hours, turning the pavement into a slaughterhouse where mercy goes to die. And regular folks are walking through a kill zone, caught between 2 armies, fighting for the throne of the underworld. With $20 million a year on the table, the clock started ticking at exactly 2:30 p.m. yesterday afternoon, Thursday, September 15th. Bumpy Johnson, backed by 24 soldiers, marched into the Renaissance Ballroom on West 138th Street, where Dutch Schultz was holding court with his capos. In front of 100 eyes, even off-duty cops, Johnson didn't blink. Johnson walked right up to Schultz's table, cold as ice, and laid down the law with an ultimatum that left no room for stuttering. You have 48 hours to pull every rat you own out of Harlem. Pack your trucks, grab your bagmen, take your muscle, and get lost. This is the only courtesy call. After 48 hours, any outsider running numbers here ends up in a box. I don't care if you are Dutch Schultz or the president himself. Harlem belongs to us, and we are taking back what is ours. Witnesses say Dutch Schultz, the 30-year-old bootlegger who had been strong-arming his way into the neighborhood for months, just laughed. He thought it was a joke. He thought he had already crushed Johnson's organization with fear and brute force. But when Johnson responded to that laugh, the room went dead silent. This was not a game. Johnson slammed a .45 caliber pistol on the table, right under Schultz's nose, and spoke words that are now echoing through every alley. You think this is a comedy act. You think Bumpy Johnson is someone you can walk over. Keep laughing, Dutch, because in 48 hours, you will be weeping blood. Johnson turned his back and walked out, leaving Schultz shaking in his boots and leaving the crowd paralyzed. They had just watched 2 of New York's deadliest wolves lock eyes. Blood was the only answer left. The war didn't wait for the deadline. The violence kicked off the second Johnson stepped outside, proving this wasn't just big talk. Johnson had a military-grade operation ready to roll, precise and deadly, with pieces that were already on the board. 3:45 p.m. Thursday, September 15th. Leo the Lip Lindemann. Schultz's 34-year-old muscle who enjoyed terrorizing local business owners into selling out to the mob ran out of luck outside a speakeasy on Lenox Avenue. Witnesses say 3 men stepped up to Lindemann as he reached for his car door. One of them called his name. Lindemann turned around to face his judgment, and they cut him down with Thompson's submachine guns at point-blank range. The hit squad vanished in a black Packard that police found torched in the Bronx later. No evidence left. 5:20 p.m. Thursday. Vincent Clutch, Morello, and James Red Sullivan, 2 of Schultz's bagmen, the guys who collected the slips and the cash from the runners, met their end in an ambush on West 145th Street. Police say they were sitting in their car, counting the day's take, when a truck pulled up and 4 shooters unleashed hell, killing them instantly and turning the car into Swiss cheese. Over 100 rounds were fired in broad daylight. Dozens of people watched the execution unfold on the street, but miraculously, no civilians caught a stray. 8:30 p.m. Thursday. Michael Mickey Russo, 28, the banker who counted the money and calculated the payouts, was blown to pieces outside his apartment in the Bronx. Police say it was a professional hit, a bomb rigged under his car that detonated the second he got close. The blast blew out windows across the street and left a crater in the pavement, where Russo used to be. 11:45 p.m. Thursday. Little Tony Benedetto and Joey Numbers Catalano, middle management types, were having a late dinner in East Harlem when death walked in. Witnesses say 5 men marched into the joint, straight to their table. No hesitation. They opened fire without a word. Both targets down, and a waiter took a slug for trying to be a hero. 2:15 a.m. Friday, September 16th. Harold Bunny Weinstein, Schultz's top lieutenant running the Harlem show, was next on the list. His fortress on the Upper West Side got hit by a small army of about 20 men, who blew the door off its hinges and slaughtered Weinstein and his 2 bodyguards inside. By sunrise Friday, less than 12 hours after the warning, 6 of Schultz's men were in the morgue. His operation was crippled, and the NYPD is scrambling every unit they have to stop the bleeding, in what Commissioner Mulroney is calling the most dangerous war in the city's history, and it is just getting started. You need to understand the man who declared war on Dutch Schultz, Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, known on the street as Bumpy because of a knot on his head from a childhood fight. He is a figure who has been climbing the ladder of Harlem's underworld for 7 years, transforming from a small-time numbers runner into the man they now call the Godfather of Harlem. The background. Born down in Charleston, South Carolina, 1905. Johnson came to Harlem with his family in 1919, at 14, looking for the kind of chances colored families couldn't find, down south. But instead of an honest living, young Johnson heard the call of the street life, starting as a runner for Stephanie St. Clair, the legendary Madam Queen who built the Harlem numbers racket into a multi-million-dollar business. Johnson showed everyone he was smart, ruthless, and ambitious, while other runners just picked up bets and dropped them at the banks. Johnson studied the game, understood the math, saw the massive profits on the table, and plotted his own way to the top. 1925 to 1928. Johnson worked right under Madame St. Clair, becoming her top enforcer. In those days, he made a name for violence. Johnson was suspected of clipping at least a dozen men who tried to rob the banks or threatened Madame St. Clair, though the cops never filed charges because no witness had the guts to testify against him. 1928 to 1930. A dark spot in Johnson's history. He vanished from Harlem for near 2 years. Some say he was in Chicago, though nobody knows exactly why. When Johnson came back to Harlem in 1930, he had cash, connections, and he knew how to organize crime in a way he didn't before he left. 1930 to 1932, Johnson grew the business past just muscle, taking over banks, pulling small crews together, and building a gambling empire worth $5 million a year. But what matters even more, Johnson built loyalty with Harlem's crooks and the people on the street. He was known for keeping white mobsters off the operators, giving jobs to hundreds of locals, and putting money in colored churches and charities, making him a hero in the neighborhood. Despite the racket, the situation now, Johnson's rise, put him on a collision course with Dutch Schultz, who was taking Harlem's numbers by force and fear. For 18 months, Schultz's boys forced colored operators to sell their spots for pennies on the dollar, killing anyone who said no, and draining huge profits from Harlem while using white muscle instead of local talent. By September 1932, Schultz held 40% of the business, pushed Madame St. Clair to the sidelines, and looked ready to take the whole pot of Harlem's richest racket. But Schultz underestimated Bumpy Johnson. He saw just another colored hood to scare or kill, didn't see Johnson had been planning his hit for months, and didn't see Johnson had support, deeper than just a gang. Arthur Fliegenheimer, calling himself Dutch Schultz to hide his Jewish roots and sound tougher, is one of New York's scariest gangsters, a 30-year-old bootlegger, running booze, gambling, and unions worth over $50 million a year. The background. Born in the Bronx, 1902, to German Jewish parents, Fliegenheimer turned to crime as a kid. After his father walked out and his mother couldn't pay the bills, he took the name Dutch Schultz from a bad Bronx gang, thinking a German name scared people more than a Jewish one in a world run by Irish and Italians. The Empire. Schultz made his pile during Prohibition, running beer in the Bronx and Manhattan, buying off cops, so deep even other mobsters respected his reach. By 1930, Schultz was one of the richest crooks in America, living high, eating at the best spots, and working with total immunity because the law was in his pocket. The Harlem move. But the booze money was shaking with the end of Prohibition coming, and Schultz knew he needed rackets that stayed illegal. The numbers game, especially Harlem's setup, was the perfect play. Early 1931, Schultz started grabbing Harlem's banks, using business smarts and cold brutality. Schultz's men would step to the colored operators and offer to buy them out for 10 or 20% of the value. Say no, and you get a beating. Your bank gets firebombed, or your family gets marked for death. Operators who held out got clipped, shot in the street, bombed at home, or hid in public to send a message. Police figure. Schultz's crew killed 30 operators in 18 months trying to take the neighborhood. Economic war. Schultz's money let him cut odds, pay big to steal players, and take a loss just to win. By September 1932, the Dutchman was tightening the noose, bleeding dry every rival who couldn't match the weight of his coin. With 40% of Harlem's numbers racket in his pocket, he had crushed the small-time operators and stood like an untouchable titan. But the Dutchman made a fatal miscalculation. He underestimated the resolve of Bumpy Johnson and failed to see the line in the sand regarding just how much blood Harlem's people would tolerate from an outsider. As the presses roll on this cold Friday evening, September 16th, the clock is ticking. Only 27 hours remain on the lethal 48-hour ultimatum Johnson served to Schultz. The air in Harlem is thick enough to choke on. Folks are barricaded behind locked doors, and shops have shuttered their windows tight. The streets are swarming with copper badges, a heavy presence unseen since the blood-soaked riots of 1919. The law speaks. Commissioner Edward P. Mulrooney took the podium at headquarters this morning, desperation evident in his voice as he laid down the iron law to halt the bloodshed, declaring the department would not stomach open warfare on these streets, no matter the borough. We have flooded Harlem with 500 extra boots, set up blockades on the avenues, and issued orders to shackle anyone, no matter their skin or station, caught packing heat or looking like they belong to a syndicate. I am demanding these factions holster their weapons, settle this like civilized men, and understand that spilling more blood will bring the full wrath of the justice system crashing down on their heads. Yet, word on the street is that the badge has lost its shine, and these crackdowns are useless when the gangsters have already bought and paid for half the precinct. Whispers from the inside confirm what everyone already knows. The rot goes deep within the department. Johnson and Schultz both have officers eating from their hands, ensuring that any call for help during a shootout arrives too late or looks the other way. As for the people, Harlem stands behind its own, backing Johnson's play. They see this not as a simple turf war, but a battle for the very soul and coin of the neighborhood against an invader. Even the pulpit speaks. Reverend Powell of the Abyssinian Baptist Church gave a sermon that sounded suspiciously like a blessing for Johnson's war. He preached that while sin is sin, the Dutchman's crew has ruled with fear, sucking millions from our streets while offering nothing but misery in return, and spilling our blood without a second thought. If Johnson fights to take back what belongs to Harlem, then the people see a shield, not a sword. The question remains, what happens when the clock strikes 2:30, tomorrow afternoon? There are only 3 ways this hand plays out. First, the Dutchman folds. He realizes the price of blood is too high, pulls his men out of the territory, and bows to Johnson's terms. But nobody believes a man like him walks away. Schultz has too much gold buried here, too much ego to bow to a local boss, and an arsenal that dwarfs Johnson's crew. Second, a sit-down. Both families come to the table and carve up the streets, agreeing to coexist, with clear lines in the sand. But with the bodies dropping and the ultimatum broadcast to the world, shaking hands now would look like weakness, and weakness gets you killed. Third, total war. This is the smart bet. Once the time is up, hell breaks loose, both armies aim for the throat, and these streets turn into a slaughterhouse, where the body count could hit triple digits before a victor stands tall, or the feds drag enough wise guys into cells to stop the bleeding. The eyes of Washington are now fixed on Harlem. Federal power brokers are watching the board, ready to make a move if the local cops can't hold the line. J. Edgar Hoover himself, the head of the bureau, has unleashed his hounds from the New York office to dig into both syndicates, hunting for any excuse to bring down the hammer. Bootlegging, moving hot goods across state lines, dodging the taxman, and every other federal offense in the book. The Treasury boys are tearing through the ledgers, searching for the money trail that leads straight to a prison cell for the bosses. They nailed Capone on the numbers when the murder charges wouldn't stick, proving that even a kingpin can be caged for stiffing Uncle Sam on his dirty money. Now, look at the politics. This war is bad for business in an election year. With the vote coming up in November, President Hoover fighting for his life against Roosevelt, and the country drowning in the Great Depression, gangsters shooting up New York is a black eye for the administration, and it gives his enemies plenty of ammunition. They claim the dry laws brought nothing but trouble to the streets. But to understand the savagery of this war, you have to look at the books of the Harlem numbers racket. According to the coppers, and the ones watching from the shadows, the game pulls in roughly 20 million clams a year, making it the richest hustle in these United States. Here is how the operation runs. The numbers, or bolita, is a poor man's market where folks lay down a dime or a dollar on 3 digits, praying their luck holds for the daily draw. The winning combination comes from the financial pages, usually the tail of the stock exchange volume, so the bosses cannot cook the books. The odds are 1,000 to 1, but the payout is only 600, leaving a heavy cut for the house. Naturally, most players walk away empty, meaning the bank keeps the lion's share. Of that 20 million wagered in Harlem, only 2 million goes back to the streets. 3 million covers the overhead, the runners, the collectors, the muscle, and the banks. Another 2 million greases the palms of the police, the politicians, and the judges. 13 million is pure, cold profit for the bosses. This is the fortune Dutch Schultz and Bumpy Johnson are bleeding for, a pot of gold representing one of the largest criminal treasuries in all of America. The streets breathe this game. It is the lifeblood of Harlem. Thousands earn their keep as runners, collectors, and lieutenants in the machine. Even the clean joints, restaurants, barbershops, newsstands act as drops for the slips and take their cut. Word is, 25,000 souls in Harlem put food on the table with policy money, making the question of who holds the crown a matter of survival. The clock is ticking down. Will Saturday bring the slaughter? As Friday fades into darkness, the streets of Harlem go quiet, civilians hiding from the stray bullets, police locking down the corners, and a terrible question hanging over the city. Will the sun rise on peace? Or will it shine on a massacre that turns Harlem into a war zone? Canaries inside both the Johnson and Schultz camps have sung to this paper war is coming. They are stacking the armory, planting the shooters, and marking the hits, ready to strike if that 48-hour clock runs out. And Schultz has not vacated the territory. Johnson has rallied an army of 200 hard men, great war veterans who know the smell of powder and death. They have the Thompson choppers and rooftop snipers watching Schultz's spots, and the getaway cars are idling. But Schultz, with his deep pockets, has called in the cavalry. From the Bronx and Jersey, witnesses saw the trucks rolling in, heavy with hired guns and hardware, signs that the Dutchman intends to answer Johnson's ultimatum with a hammer blow, meant to bury Johnson's crew for good. The fuse is lit. The deadline looms, and the city holds its breath, waiting to see if tomorrow brings a handshake or a level of violence never seen before. Note, the Herald will keep eyes on this unfolding disaster. Saturday's edition will carry the word from the Harlem pavement, words from the badges and the suits, and what this war means for New York and the country. We tell our readers, stay clear of Harlem until the smoke clears. The risk of catching a bullet or falling to the chaos is real. We will report as the bodies fall. This warfare in Harlem, these hoodlums calling each other out to die, the arrogance of daylight murder, and the law standing by helpless, it is the final failure of the great experiment that started with such promise 12 years ago. When the 18th passed in 1919 and the Volstead hit in 1920, the Crusaders swore that drying out the country would kill crime, close the saloons, and build a righteous America. Instead, it birthed a monster. It made kings of thieves, rotted the badges from the inside, gave the mobs the keys to the city, and turned honest men into outlaws just for wanting a drink, against the government's word. The blood about to flow in Harlem is on Prohibition's hands. Schultz bought the power to strangle Harlem with bootleg cash, money that wouldn't exist if the law worked. Bumpy Johnson built his empire on the numbers because the dry laws proved one thing, that the law is just a suggestion. The rot that lets these men stand tall, the coppers in their pockets, the politicians providing cover, the judges pounding the gavel for freedom, was bought with prohibition gold and the foolish idea that you can legislate morality. The paper's been saying it since 1925. This dry law is a bust, a failed experiment that ain't worth a dime. Keeping it going just costs blood and bribes. The disrespect for the law, it outweighs any good this mess was supposed to bring. This war in Harlem? It's proof right there. The big shots in both parties need to wake up and admit this whole thing is dead. Scrap the 18th Amendment. Look at the bodies dropping in Harlem. We're staring at a slaughter that's going to claim dozens more before the week is out. It's all cause of a policy that wrecked society. Now, my sources inside the department tell me the Herald got wind of something new. More blood spilled in the last 2 hours. 3 of Dutch Schultz's boys got clipped on Lenox Avenue. Just like that, they're gone. Around 9:30, witnesses saw a ride with 4 colored fellas creeping past a crew of white guys on the corner. They were loitering outside a gin joint when one of the fellas in the car yelled out, "This is Bumpy's territory." Then the lead started flying. Cops showed up to find 3 stiffs and 2 bleeding out. All Schultz's muscle, paid to hold the line. They were planted in Harlem to guard the Dutchman's numbers racket. The shooters, they vanished into the night before the bulls got there. That makes 9 bodies cold since Bumpy Johnson laid down the law yesterday. The cops say they ain't never seen New York bleed like this before. Commissioner Mulrooney laid it out plain. Starting midnight tonight, Harlem's under lockdown, a strict curfew for the whole neighborhood. It stays that way until they say otherwise. Every joint shuts its doors by 12. Folks better stay inside if they know what's good for 'em. Anyone caught wandering the streets of Harlem after hours without a good reason is getting thrown in the can. The Herald keeps talking as the clock ticks past midnight into Saturday. September 17th, 1932, rises over a city holding a gun. Less than 16 hours left. Bumpy Johnson gave him 48, and that clock runs out at 2:30 this afternoon. The question on everyone's mind, the answer coming in 16 hours, is simple. Will Dutch Schultz flinch first? Will he pull out of Harlem to stop the bleeding? Will he admit Bumpy Johnson's got the muscle and the guts to make this war too expensive? Or will the Dutchman dig his heels in? Maybe he answers Johnson with enough firepower to crush the guy who dared to step to him. Maybe he turns Harlem into a graveyard, deciding who runs the numbers game with bullets, wiping out dozens of lives in the process. Before one boss stands tall, we find out exactly how this ends tomorrow afternoon at 2:30 sharp. New York ain't breathing. Harlem's racking the slides, and history is waiting to see if September 17th, 1932, goes down as the day a colored gangster stood up and broke the white mob's chokehold on Harlem for good. Or if it's the day brute force crushed a rebellion, proving that coming at the king, no matter the cause, only ends in a pine box. The Herald covers the fallout as it happens. May God have mercy on this city.